One is they have acquired enormous political and financial power. You'll find representatives of the order in politics.
What have they done with this power? What has happened to America that would not have happened had they not been the order?
Creation of war and revolution.
Specifically, which ones?
The third book in this series, which I'm bringing out, takes two wars and one revolution. Well, two revolutions in one war. World War II, the Bolshevik Revolution, and the rise of Hitler, which I call a revolution in Germany. We can find the order behind the Russian Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution. We can find behind the rise of Hitler. We can find in the maintenance of both of these systems, to transfer technology to both.
Since you've already proven that Wall Street is behind the Bolshevik Revolution and the rise of Hitler, now you're proving that the order is behind Wall Street.
Exactly.
Well, that's Professor Anthony Sutton there, speaking back in the late 1980s. And Martin, the points he's making are pretty strong, that a secret organisation was really only revealed in the 1980s. It had been secret for 150 years because the oaths that those people are part of it swear are so absolutely watertight. Even if the order is discussed in the room, you walk out. But I've been looking at the sort of comparison to the UK, and in the Second World War there was something called the Other Club, which Winston Churchill was part of, which he met every week at the Savoy. People like Oswald Mosley, who were totally diametrically opposed to him politically. So this does sound like maybe there's something similar was going on in the UK.
Well, it's not a surprise that the rich and the powerful get together to plot to do what they want to do. It's hardly a surprise, is it? It's just, they'll find various pretexts and ways to do it, but they've been doing it throughout history, and therefore there's not much doubt that they're still at it.
What about this term New World Order? Because I notice there's been a series on the BBC the last few weeks, on BBC Two, called China, A New World Order. Now, it almost seems as if the mass media is trying to, I suppose, paint China with something that actually has been going on over in the United States particularly too.
Well, I mean, for the last 500 years, the Western powers have dominated the globe. And what's going to happen in the future is quite clearly they're not going to be able to do the things that they used to do in the way that they used to do them. And the big threat to them is China's economic strength and Russia's military strength. And, of course, in combination, that frustrates the West's geopolitical strategy.
I mean, traditionally on this programme we talk about people making money from war. Of course they do. The arms industry make tremendous amounts of money. Resources can be grabbed and that sort of thing. But we don't often touch on this idea that from a war you can often create chaos and then bring the outcome you want from that.
Yeah, well, I mean, what's happened throughout most of Western history is that there's been a sort of privileged bubble in which, lucky people in lucky countries have been protected from all of this nonsense, and of course, out there in the ungoverned spaces, chaos is used as a mechanism of control of poor people. And, it's been going on for a long time, and it's intensified in the last 20 or 30 years.
What do you make of Anthony Sutton's assertion, though? I mean, he's written two books he's hinted at there. In fact, the person interviewing him was saying Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution and Wall Street and the rise of Hitler. Is it feasible that both of these movements,
I think there's
had money from Wall Street?
There's strong evidence that the Nazis were supported by Wall Street. I think that's pretty clear. I think the evidence that they ran the Russian Revolution is less obvious. I think I find that hard to accept.
Wasn't it Alan Bullock? He was one of your teachers.
He was the master of St. Catherine's.
Because he pointed out that there are actually quite a lot of parallels with Hitler.
Well, he wrote
Stalin.
a book, Hitler and Stalin: Parallel Lives, because of course they lived at the same time and they were both brutal dictators, but they were rather different in their methods. So, for example, Hitler used to delegate a lot to other people. And that's, we're coming on to talk about Bormann in a minute. That gave Bormann his power. Whereas Stalin was the Russian version of Bormann. he ran the whole show, and he came to dominate the Bolshevik Party from controlling the bureaucracy of the party. He was basically regarded as a rather humdrum guy to just keep the records and be a kind of secretary for the party.
But both of them were quite messed up individuals. They're
both very nasty people. Let's put it that way. But of course, Stalin never trusted anybody. He ultimately killed virtually everybody who knew him. Yeah. He killed everybody that was associated with him. Hitler, on the other hand, was quite laissez-faire. He killed quite a lot of people, but he surrounded himself with people who... Hitler relied on charisma. People liked Hitler. People didn't like Stalin. They were just absolutely terrified of him. So at some stages during his reign, they'd have these people clapping Stalin at party conferences, and nobody dared to sit down first. So they're clapping for an hour and a half because nobody dares to sit down. Hitler was much more free, much more kind of free form.
Hitler and Stalin. Let's have a look at the attempt, apparently by the Nazis, to assassinate Stalin, recounted in William Stevenson's book. It's called The Bormann Brotherhood. What he says is, I'll just read it out, Martin. He says, Stalin was to be assassinated. Only Hitler and Bormann knew the details. Bormann was Hitler's secretary at this point in the war. A conference would be arranged so that Ribbentrop himself could come face-to-face with the Russian leader. The Führer said, one man cannot do it alone. An accomplice is necessary. Schellenberg, in considerable apprehension as to who that accomplice was likely to be, trotted off to see if his technical experts could produce a tiny revolver that would look like a fountain pen. It had to be capable of firing a heavy caliber bullet with a reasonable accuracy at a range between 18 and 25 feet. Schellenberg thought they were all mad. Bormann did not agree with him in specific terms, but Bormann never did commit himself. This is the guy who was basically managing. This is not the quoting, but he was managing Hitler at the time, Bormann was. But Bormann never did commit himself in such delicate matters. He told me, however, that the proposal to kidnap the Pope would be sidetracked. The attempt on Stalin's life did go forward, according to Schellenberg, but not along the lines of Ribbentrop's suicidal suggestion. That one was eased out of Hitler's mind by Bormann, using the standard procedure he long ago explained to Skorzeny. Agree, report progress, let time pass, and then gradually introduce obstacles. So he had no intention, Bormann, of going along with this, but the idea was that he was kind of encouraging Hitler, but at the same time knowing that he was going to have to let him down in the long term. Agree, report progress, let time pass, then gradually introduce obstacles.
Yeah, anybody who tried to do that to Stalin would have ended up dead. So that's two different ways in which these dictatorships operated. If I was a Nazi, the assassination of Stalin, I would regard it as rather pointless because somebody else is just going to take over. Stalin actually, in actual fact, was a rubbish general, and he nearly lost. He believed Hitler. Hitler was the only person who ever successfully double-crossed Stalin, because Stalin genuinely believed that Hitler was his friend, and when Hitler turned on him, he hid in his room for days on end and refused to come out and give any orders at a time when the front was collapsing in 1941. And eventually people plucked up enough courage to knock on the door from the Central Committee of the Communist Party and say, Comrade Stalin, what should we do? And he thought they'd come to execute him. And he was absolutely stunned when they said, oh, no, we've not come to execute you. We just want to have some orders, please. And then, of course, he then got back in the saddle and off he went. But, of course, what he did do...
Well, the rest is history.
Yeah, well, the rest is history. What he did do, Stalin was quite wise. He allowed Zhukov to run the battle, whereas Hitler wouldn't let his generals run the war. He wanted to run the war for them. That was his big mistake.
As we're hearing there, when there was an order given by Hitler which didn't have to be passed down the line, Bormann would sort of pat him on the back saying wonderful, and actually slowly but surely
that's right. So Hitler basically was being manipulated by Bormann. Nobody manipulated Stalin. He manipulated everybody else.
So Bormann got his position as Reichsleiter, which was the head of the Nazi Party, after Hess's flight to Britain in 1941. This was a bit of a strange incident, Martin, and apparently Hitler went crazy when he heard that Hess had decided to try and do his own little peace mission. He was encouraged by various people, including Tancred Berenius, who was the Finnish ambassador to Nazi Germany. He said, oh, well, I think, you could save everything by going to Britain. And this conveniently got Hess out of the way, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think Bormann was quite happy to see Hess do that, and then turn around to Hitler and say, look at Hess, terrible. you better put me in charge, and that's basically what happened.
So we know from reading Op JB and from various interviews around it, the author John Ainsworth Davis, the pen name Christopher Crichton, that there was a British commando mission right at the very end of the war using all sorts of other international soldiers, including a Jewish contingent, a German contingent as well, but mostly British commandos led by Ian Fleming and John Ainsworth Davis to get Bormann out from under the noses of the Russians. Yeah,
that's right. And, of course, he then turned up in Argentina some years later, and Paul Manning, who was a senior correspondent for CBS in World War II, wrote the book Martin Bormann, Nazi in Exile, because he'd escaped, basically.
Yeah, he discovered Bormann was over in South America at that point. And the thing is, this chap Paul Manning wasn't just anybody. He was the voice of the European war for American listeners.
That's right.
The CBS radio.
Absolutely mainstream journalist in American terms, yeah.
So we've got this gap, though. Bormann arrives 1945, apparently in Britain, according to Christopher Crichton and Op JB, and then suddenly he's disappears for 12 years or so. 1956. Apparently, according to Christopher Crichton in his book, he believed that was when he left Britain, because there was a very important state visit from the Soviet Union, and the British Prime Minister at the time was concerned that the KGB might discover Bormann in Britain whilst the Russians were all in the country with all these diplomats and spies, and he wanted to get him out of the way. He said that he's an absolute liability being in the UK, so that's why apparently he went in 56.
Well, I mean, as you say, there's plenty of interesting leads to follow in this story, but the take-home for people who've heard of this story for the first time is we've got eyewitness evidence from the commandos that actually sprang Bormann, John Ainsworth Davis, that he was rescued, and he'd been dealing with the Western powers for quite a long time. And, of course, as the Nazi regime collapsed, lots of Nazis were integrated into NATO as intelligence officers and so on, and therefore that explains a lot about the fascist psychological warfare techniques of NATO intelligence services.
I mean, a lot of people are sceptical about Op JB, but it is endorsed by Winston Churchill and endorsed in letters
in the book
and by Mountbatten.
They've got photographs of letters given to Ainsworth Davis by Churchill and Mountbatten and Fleming, saying, after we're all dead, you can tell the truth about what you did. The book is called Op JB because it was actually called Operation James Bond, and therefore Ian Fleming, when he wrote the James Bond books later on, used the term James Bond for his hero as a kind of wink to those in the know, because the rescue of Bormann was called Operation James Bond, and hence the name of the book by Crichton Davis, Op JB. And if you read the book, it looks pretty convincing to me. This guy's very much, I think he's telling the truth.
I'm having a few problems with that clip for some reason, but I'll try another method. What about what was Bormann up to in South America?
Well, when he got to South America, he basically the main point about this was the Red House meeting after the Battle of the Falaise Gap, which was taken in Strasbourg, and this is all in Manning's book as well about Bormann being in Latin America, and they realised that they're losing the war, and Bormann basically opened negotiations with the British intelligence services initially to say, we know we're going to lose the war. What we're going to do is we're going to move. We're going to do a deal with you. You've got to help us to escape, and we will move all he had all the industrialists come to this meeting, the German industrialists who cooperated with Hitler, and they removed all the money from the country so that the occupying powers would not get it, and then once they'd done that, they brought it back in, which is one of the reasons why you had the Wirtschaftswunder, the German economic miracle, in the late 40s and early 50s, because the former Nazi industrialists and Nazi party members like Bormann were basically working behind the scenes with Western intelligence.
And the key to this being that Bormann was the signatory to all the big bank accounts.
That's right. Bormann knew where all the money, but Bormann was the money man, basically. So he knew where all the money was.
And a lot of it was, of course, in Switzerland. Anyway, let's go now, courtesy of Grace Philby, to Reigate to pick up the story in 1945.
About 20 years ago, there was a reporter who interviewed a man who claimed he was Martin Bormann's son. And he claimed that after the war, Martin Bormann had escaped to England or had been captured by the British, was interrogated, and for whatever reasons, maybe to do with the Nazi goals, who knows, he was given sanctuary, and that Martin Bormann lived out his life with his wife in Common Road in Reigate. The son took the reporter to his house and showed him data that proved his claim that Martin Bormann was his father. I don't know what that data was, but photographs and all sorts of things. The reporter went away and started to write a story, which was published. Subsequently, the son was arrested on a drugs charge. While the son was on remand in custody, he supposedly committed suicide by hanging himself. The reporter went back to the house, gained access to the house, possibly illegally, and the data that had been there was no longer there. He couldn't find it. Now, he took on to continue investigating because Martin Bormann's son actually supposedly had a sister who lived in New Malden. And they wanted me to go and knock on this sister's door in New Malden and ask her questions about whether she was Martin Bormann's daughter. I said, you must be joking. You know, if the authorities have actually killed his son, I'm not going to go near it. There were a number of articles in the newspaper about this, but of course nothing further came of it, and it was just one of those stories that disappeared into the mists of time. But if indeed Martin Bormann did live out his days in Reigate, it might have been, once they thought he was safe after the war, they would have let him go out and go for walks, and he walked round Reigate, and I can well imagine them say, well, do you know England? Is there anywhere you'd like to live in England? Because we will resettle you and give you a new name. And he said, well, I don't know England at all, but Reigate seems a nice little town. This will do. Oh. And the official view was that Martin Bormann went to South America.
Well, that's an interview by Grace Philby. We had her on the other week talking about, she's a Churchill Fellow, or was a Churchill Fellow. She died a couple of years ago. We had her on talking about bacteriophages. She was very much an independent-minded, spirited journalist and writer, and she was very interested in pursuing this story. I mean, the place where this all took place, Martin, around this whole area in Reigate, was actually where Montgomery was based, and it was called the South Eastern Regional Command Centre during World War II. Well,
yes, I mean, it's interesting information. I mean, this guy obviously had something to do with it because he was asked, was it the Sun newspaper that was pursuing this story? Was he working for the Sun?
No, well, he didn't give the name of the newspaper. He said about 20 years ago.
Oh, I see. So I thought when he said the Sun,
he said it was in the national newspaper.
Yeah. So in other words, this is somebody who's got that is somebody who's claiming that they were told to go and investigate this story, and they decided
rather than say yes, I will go to New Malden or whatever and take this further. They're maybe sensibly saying, well, I don't think I fancy that actually, particularly since this guy apparently has just died. Of course, the other thing is, if it was Martin Bormann's son, he may not have died in prison. He may have been given a new identity, and he may have had a ceremony, a funeral that he's died. Yeah. Only maybe one or two people.
If you read Op JB, they take somebody on the expedition with them who doesn't realise what their role is, and they look like Bormann, and they've got the same teeth. They did dental work on them, so they've got this is before DNA analysis, so he's got the same teeth as Bormann, and he was actually shot dead at the end of the thing, so that everybody thinks Bormann's dead. They've got a body that looks like Bormann with the same dental profile.
Well, this
guy wasn't told what he was being taken out for.
Another thing Grace and these group of people in Reigate was saying is that this guy possibly could have been some kind of doppelganger.
Well, indeed, because in the Second World War, it'd be more difficult to do today, but in the Second World War, there was a famous film, I Was Monty's Double, and it's based on real events. Somebody who looked like Montgomery, used to go around pretending to be Montgomery, and it was a standard tactic of intelligence services in that era. More difficult to do now because you can just do a DNA test and you immediately identify who somebody is. Because they used to identify people by dental records. So if he just makes you dental work that makes it look the same as somebody, then you can have a body with the right dental profile, and then you've got a dead doppelganger.
Okay, so the books are Op JB by Christopher Crichton, published in the 1990s and published in the early 1980s. The other one is Martin Bormann, Nazi in Exile, by Paul Manning. So next week, James Files and attempts on his life after he was involved in the assassination of John F. Kennedy. He talks about surviving those, as well as Zionist terrorism in 1946. Time to sign off for the US-owned Comcast News at 8 o'clock. Thanks to our guest in the first hour, Desi Latin from the Brexit Party. I'm on Twitter at Tony Gosling. You'll find us all online on this programme, thisweekoneword.org.uk. Have a relaxing, enjoyable BCFM weekend. Our sister show Dialects on Tuesday at noon here. Please join us for the Politics Show at 6 o'clock next week. God bless, and don't let the banksters get you down.
Bringing you national news on the hour. Live from the Sky News Centre.
From the Sky News Centre at 8. David Cameron admits he thinks about the consequences of the EU referendum every single day. But the former Prime Minister's defended holding it because he feels Europe was an issue the country needed to address. He's criticised Conservative Party colleagues involved in the Leave campaign, saying they trashed